Police lines went up just after daybreak this morning as deputies prepared to search for more bodies. They found nothing in the pond, but just a few feet away, someone spotted what looked like a grave. And 2 feet below the ground, a body.
Hold it. There it is.
Not one body, but 7, stacked one on top of the other. Police brought them out in body bags. They believe they are Simmons' wife, Becky, his son, Gene Simmons Jr. of El Paso, a grandchild, and 4 of Simmons' younger children still living at home. 17-year-old Loretta, 15-year-old Eddie, 10-year-old Marianne, and 8-year-old Becky.
Hi guys, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. So greatly appreciate it. Truly is. Before we get started, let me give you my usual disclaimer that this video is for educational purposes only. Please do not take what I say as fact. Please always do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Next, if you have not liked, subscribed, or commented yet, please consider doing so. It really helps me out. I really appreciate it. Okay, so this is True Crime at Christmas Time, Day 2. Ronald Gene Simmons. Before we start, I need to give you a major trigger warning. This story is extremely difficult to listen to. He took a lot of lives, and his youngest victim was just one. So please keep that in mind when deciding if you want to continue watching. If you've decided to stick around, thank you. I love having you here. And let's get started, okay? So Ronald Gene Simmons Sr. was born on July 15th, 1940. He was part of the United States Navy from 1957 to 1963 and part of the United States Air Force from 1965 to 1979. When he left the Air Force, his rank was Master Sergeant. So why and how did this seemingly noble military man that fought so hard for our country go so terribly wrong? Ronald was originally born in Chicago, Illinois. His father, William, died from a stroke in 1943 when he was just 3 years old. Then after his father's death, his mom married a civil engineer for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, also named William. Yes, same name as his birth father. Just 3 years after this, in 1946, William would move the family to Little Rock, Arkansas, and this would be the first of many moves that the family would have to make over the years. I truly have so much respect for military families. I don't know how you guys do it. I truly don't. September 15th, 1957, Simmons would drop out of high school to join the United States Navy. He's first stationed in Washington, and this is where he would meet his future wife, Becky. The couple married in New Mexico on July 9th, 1960, and over the next 18 years, they would have 7 beautiful children together. Sheila, Ronald, Eddie, William, Marianne, and Rebecca. Ronald would go on to have one more child and grandchild on the same day when he impregnated his 17-year-old daughter, Sheila. Yeah, you heard that right. And Sheila ended up giving birth to her father's child, a little girl that she named Sylvia. April 3rd, 1981. Gene Simmons begins being investigated by the New Mexico Department of Human Services for fathering his daughter's child. Scared of being arrested, the family fled and took up residence in 2 older model mobile homes on a 13-acre stretch of land that would later become known as Mockingbird Hill. Okay. Before we go on, it's coming. So, again, please make sure that you really want to hear this, okay? December 23rd, 1987. Ronald Simmons wakes up that morning, goes to Walmart, and buys a .22 caliber handgun. He then goes home, and then his wife Rebecca and his son Gene. He then his 3-year-old daughter Barbara. Before these were carried out, Simmons made his children dig a hole in the backyard. He told them that it was for a third outhouse because their home didn't have plumbing. The truth, though, in actuality, was that it was them digging their own grave. After he killed Rebecca, Jean, and Barbara, he placed them in the homemade grave and then he waited. When the school bus dropped off 17-year-old Loretta, 14-year-old Eddie, 12-year-old Marianne, and 8-year-old Becky, he met the children at the door. He told them that he had early Christmas presents for them, but he wanted to give it to them one at a time. So he instructed the children to go to their rooms and wait for him to come and get them. 17-year-old Loretta went first. She was and drowned in a rain barrel. The other 3 met the same fate, one right after another. When he was done, he put them in the makeshift grave with the others, poured kerosene on top of them in hopes to help hide the smell of decomposition. He then sat around and drank while waiting for more of his family to come and visit for the Christmas holiday. December 26, 1987. Simmons' son Billy and his wife Renata were both and when they arrived. Their 3-year-old son Trey was and drowned. Next to arrive at the home was Simmons' daughter Sheila, the one that he had the baby with, and her husband Dennis. They were both. Then his daughter/granddaughter Sylvia to death. Last to die from the Simmons family was Jean's 1-year-old grandson, Michael. Okay. After he was done, he placed the bodies in a row and covered them with their coats in the family room. Except for Sheila, who was covered with their best tablecloth. Okay? The 2 grandchildren, the 2 little babies, were placed in plastic sheeting and put into the trunk of an abandoned car on the property. So he couldn't even let those babies stay with their parents in death. Why did you have to put them in a trunk all by themselves? Like, haven't you done enough? After he was done, he went out to the local bar for a few drinks, like nothing ever happened, like he didn't just annihilate 14 family members. It's sick. He's a sick, twisted, end of story, period. There's no other words. He would then spend the next 3 days hanging out and drinking beers, still with his family members all around him. Monday, December 28th, 1987. Gene woke up and drove to his local Walmart where he purchased a second handgun. Why were 2 handguns purchased in 7 days? And why was this not a red flag for you, Walmart? Do better. From there, he drove to the law firm of Peel, Eddy, and Gibbons, where his previous co-worker worked as a receptionist. A woman named Kathy Kendrick that Simmons worked with at a place called Woodline Motor Freight. He was attracted to Kathy when the 2 worked together, but the feelings were not mutual. Plus, he was married. So there's that. But then again, he impregnated his daughter, so I guess whatever. He doesn't really take the sacrament of marriage very serious. Simmons' unwanted advances began to frighten Kathy, and she reported to their bosses at Woodline, but Gene would end up quitting before anything could be done about it. He shot and killed Kathy first that morning. After Kathy was dead, Simmons headed over to Taylor Oil Company looking for a man named Rusty Taylor. Rusty owned the mini mart that Simmons was previously employed at. He shot Rusty, but thankfully Rusty survived. Sadly, a truck driver for the mini mart named Jim Chafin would not be so lucky. After he was done there, he headed over to the mini mart that he was previously employed at and shot workers Roberta Woolery and David Sallier. Thankfully, they both survived the attack. Lastly, he drove over to Woodline Freight where he shot his former boss, Joyce Butts, in the head and chest. But thankfully, by some miracle, she survived as well.
But the killings didn't stop here at the secluded house. Two, Jim Chafin and Kathy Kendrick, were murdered publicly in Russellville on Monday morning, bringing the total number of bodies to 16. Julie Money says she missed Simmons' bullet during a Monday morning shooting spree.
I said, when he looked at me with that gun and pointed that gun on me, he had this just horrid grin on his face. And he looked mad. He just looked mad, and like a mad dog would look at you.
A mad dog, a recluse, a weirdo, and a nice guy. All descriptions of this man.
It's right next door, just a couple houses down. And it was late before we ever got in bed. And I just laid there. I could see those kids' faces. It was scary.
After shooting Joyce, he took office worker Vicki Jackson hostage. He told her that he wasn't going to hurt her, and then he instructed her to phone police. While waiting for the police, he began to make small talk with Vicki, telling her that he had killed everyone that hurt him. When police finally arrived, Simmons handed over his gun and surrendered peacefully. During trial, Simmons was convicted of 14 counts of capital murder and sentenced to death plus 147 years. He requested that his means of death be through lethal injection, and he refused all appeals, telling the court that he wanted to be executed. Former U.S. President Bill Clinton was the governor at the time and the person who signed Simmons' execution warrant in May of 1990. Simmons was executed on June 25th, 1990. This was not only the worst mass family murder in U.S. history, but it was also the shortest sentence to execution in U.S. history. This is what Simmons wanted. He wanted to be executed. He told the courts he wanted to be executed. He did not want to appeal his conviction. This is what he wanted. So, even after all the savage acts that he carried out, we went and gave him exactly what he wanted in the shortest period of time in U.S. history. So, to me, it feels like he was being rewarded for his crimes, and that quite literally makes me sick.
Margaret, Mr. Simmons, Ronald Gene Simmons, was taken into the death chamber just a few minutes before 9 o'clock this evening. At 9:02, the lethal injection began, and at 9:17, he was pronounced dead by Lincoln County Coroner Keith Griffin. In the final moments before the saline solution was diluted with the chemicals that finally put Mr. Simmons to death, Simmons muttered these words to Department of Correction Director Art Lockhart: "Justice delayed, finally be done, it's justifiable homicide." Associated Press Bureau Chief Bill Simmons was in the execution chamber. He was among 14 witnesses who saw Ronald Gene Simmons put to death.
At 9:18, Lincoln County Coroner Keith Griffin, I believe it was, then stepped into view wearing green surgical gloves and a stethoscope, and he listened for any sign of a pulse in Mr. Simmons and officially pronounced the condemned man dead at 9:19 p.m., at which point Mr. Lockhart read the official pronouncement that the execution had been carried out pursuant to the order of the trial court.
There was some discussion, one other statement that Mr. Simmons made in the execution chamber. He wanted that order read before his death, and Mr. Lockhart advised Simmons that that would be done afterwards. There has been the question asked repeatedly since the deaths of the Simmons family, why? And attorneys who were present this evening were among the witnesses, and they were asked that question again this evening if they knew. They alluded to the fact that they did know some of the reasons, but they told us that at this time they cannot talk about it. Shortly after 5 o'clock, attorneys Harris and Irwin went to visit with Mr. Simmons. He refused to talk with them about any course of appeal. Apparently there was some conversation out in that cell block area, but the attorneys refused to talk about what was discussed. But they made it very clear that Simmons said he would refuse any choice of appeals at this time, and the execution was carried out on schedule.
And that, of course, is the last picture that we will have of R. Gene Simmons. This is the hearse leaving the Cummins Prisons grounds. As we mentioned earlier, the execution began at about 9:02. It was completed. R. Gene Simmons pronounced dead at about 9:19. The hearse left the grounds shortly after 9:30.
Personally, I think he should have rotted in a cell for at the very least 21 years. 1 year for his wife, Rebecca. 1 year for his son, Gene. 1 year for his 3-year-old daughter, Barbara. 1 year for 17-year-old Loretta. 1 year for 14-year-old Eddie. 1 year for 12-year-old Marianne. 1 year for 8-year-old Becky. 1 year for his son, Billy. 1 year for his daughter-in-law, Renata. 1 year for his 3-year-old grandson, Trey. 1 year for his daughter, Sheila. 1 year for his son-in-law, Dennis. 1 year for his daughter/granddaughter, Sylvia. 1 year for his grandson, Michael. 1 year for Kelly Kendrick. 1 year for Rusty Taylor. 1 year for Jim Chafin. 1 year for Roberta Woolery. 1 year for David Sellier. 1 year for Joyce Butts. And 1 year for hostage Vicki Jackson. It's a lot of people. All right, guys, if you're still here, thank you. I appreciate you so very much. If you have not liked, subscribed, or commented yet, please consider doing so. And if you have any suggestions, email me, harding527@yahoo.com. And until next time, be safe out there.